Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Carter DeLoro. I'm from New York City. I went to Pomona College for undergrad, and I worked in admissions at Pomona and Occidental. I've been a school-based counselor across New England and the Midwest, and I'm currently the co-director of college counseling at the Marymount School of New York.
I'm Mark Stucker, and I'm the founder and producer. Our mission is to make college knowledge available to all. We care deeply about your kid. We believe college is a match to be made and not a prize to be won. We believe in being genuine and transparent. We are committed to covering a variety of topics, including the tough subjects. Thanks to your generosity, we're committed to providing a minimum of 10 hours of fresh, commercial-free content every month, with episodes every Monday and Thursday. We have a variety of co-hosts because we believe and value diverse perspectives. You're our listening family, and we get great joy every time we meet with you, as we do our best to give you tools so your students can soar and reach their limitless potential. This week in the news, Carter DeLoro joins me to answer a question from a college counselor in New York at a private religious school. And the counselor wants to know how taking a gap year can increase the chances of admission for the student when they apply the following year. Carter joins me to tackle that one. Then we'll have part two, the final part of my interview with Barbara Kalmus. And Barbara's talking about how when we use certain language, students hear something completely different, and it can be adverse to their mental health. And then for a college spotlight, Grace Robertson-Lloyd, a regional from Denver representing Grinnell College, will be helping us understand Grinnell College. Listen and enjoy. Friends, my Michigan State Spartans are in the Sweet 16 for the 17th time under Tom Izzo. That's the fourth most all time. So, we play our big game against UConn, and if Connecticut beats us, I'm not going to be liking Connecticut very much. But if we win, I might be trash talking.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, friends, I've got the perfect person to answer this next question. Carter is here, and our question asker is coming from a religious affiliated private school in New York. And guess who works at a religious affiliated private school as a counselor in New York? That would be Carter.
That's me.
That's Carter. He's at a Catholic girls' school, right?
That's right.
Now?
Yep.
Of course, Carter's been at lots of different schools over the years. Not all the schools have been religious affiliated, but I'm going to play the question, and I want to get Carter's thoughts on this.
Hello, Mark, and the rest of the YCBK staff. I am a college counselor in a private religious boys' high school in New York. Almost every graduating senior at my school takes a gap year. This detail is important for my question. If a student applied regular decision to a highly rejective college and was rejected, could applying to the same school during his gap year in the early decision round possibly result in a different decision? Nothing else would have changed in his application, except he took a year of overseas study and the fact that he now applied ED, early decision. I know this could be perceived by the university as a reaction to a rejection at a different ED school, but actually that's not what happened. He just didn't get his act together early enough to apply ED anywhere the first time around. If you choose my question, thank you in advance.
You're up, my friend.
Okay. Fundamentally, the caller's question is, right, would reapplying through early decision to a school the year after being denied in regular decision yield a different result? And I think in short, the answer is yes, it could. It certainly could. I think one of the things that we've seen, and this maybe goes back to our conversation on the podcast a couple of months ago, that early decision confers such an advantage in the application process that, all other details of this question aside, there's absolutely a chance that that a sort of reapplication can result in and admit if that student is applying through early decision. There's a couple of things that I guess I'm wanting to flag with the particulars of this. Applying through a on a gap year is always interesting. I generally try to advocate that students secure their college before they head on their gap year, so that they can be fully present in the gap year that they're doing and not have to worry about applying to college. I assume that the caller shares that and understands why I would say that and all of that. Be, but I hear that this situation is potentially different. I guess I would encourage the student, if they are going to be going on this gap year, it's not going to be the same application. I would encourage them to write a new essay. They're going to be a different person than they were a year earlier. And so having the additional reflection of the senior year of high school, the summer after senior year, and the beginnings of whatever gap year they're on, I think are absolutely things that they should be factoring into their application, their new application through early decision to this school that they've already applied to. And that additional perspective in life, that opportunity to reflect on a different aspect of what they presented initially, I think could also be extremely beneficial. And if you think about it, the school will probably review the original application, at least the notes on the application. And so I would absolutely change up the supplements and the main essay as the student is applying, just to expand what the new school know, or what this school knows about who they are. I would want to, I guess, caution about the year of overseas study that the caller recommends. Depending on what that looks like, if the student is attending an international college or earning college credit overseas, they could be viewed as a transfer applicant instead of a first year applicant. And so I would want to be really careful, I guess, about the type of gap year that they're going on to make sure that they're able to stay in the first year applicant pool at this school. And since they have a school in mind, I think that is something they could call and ask an admissions office to say, if I go do this particular program, am I still going to be able to be considered as a first year applicant when I'm ready to apply? And I know it's a kind of a lot that I'm reeling off right here, but the last thing that really jumped out to me for now is the idea of a school sort of reading into the early decision uh, reapplication as a reaction to a different rejection. This echoes a question that I'll get from students when it comes to even applying early decision to somewhere. If a student says to me, I know why I want to apply early decision to, but the college might assume that I got rejected from somewhere else in early decision one, and doesn't that make me a less competitive applicant in their eyes? And my answer is no. It absolutely is not a knock against you if a college surmises or suspects that you've been denied from anywhere else. If you're in an early decision pool, you're telling them that they can have your tuition dollars, your presence on their campus the following year, if they want it. And whatever else came before, I don't think matters to the college. It's going to be, potentially seen as a stroke of good luck. Now they have an opportunity to lock you in when somebody else missed that opportunity. So I don't worry about if a college thinks that you might have been rejected. In my experience and with conversations with reps now, I just have never heard anyone saying, well, oh, because we think that some other place rejected them, we don't want to touch them. It's just not how I've experienced it working. So those are a lot of my initial reactions to the question. And again, I'm curious to hear, Mark, what you think.
Well, that was a really good answer. I mean, you hit on so many points that were really important there. You started by mentioning that ED is such a game changer. It's such an advantage for a school to know who's coming that it's really apples and oranges comparing a past regular decision applicant to an ED applicant. So I think that point was really a good one. Your other point was great as well, that there are some colleges that literally, if you take one class at another school, you're now a transfer app, like one for, 3 credit hours or something. So it's always good to check what's the nature of this academic experience you're having. Is it college credit? How will the individual schools deem and classify that? I think that point was really a good one. Your other point is you shouldn't see it as just doing the same, because it's not going to be the same. You're going to change up your writing components. And then the other thing too is with the overseas experience, there is an aspect to bring in some new components of what you've learned from that overseas experience, which in effect is different from your original, application. We've talked about this on the podcast before. You also touched on it, which is, generally speaking, we like people who are going to do gap years to secure your gap year experience and then go do whatever it is you want to do. And you brought up a really good point, which is that's so you can be fully engaged in your gap year experience and not be thinking about applying for college. But it's also hard on the institution too, because now you're talking about going back and getting counselor recs and teacher recs and everything from people who are really focused on their current class, and that's kind of their priority. And sometimes that's difficult logistically to do that whole piece. Certainly there are people that do apply for gap years. I did a whole gap year deep dive interview, on this podcast with Matt Bonser, who's one of the more nationally renowned people for gap years. Colorado College have their Gap Institute. They're really leaders in this field. And so there is a person that does apply with that kind of gap year. But in general, we tend to discourage it in most instances. But there certainly are times when it does make sense. And your last point, I think, is really a good one. Colleges are trained not to judge. So, there wouldn't even be the judgment of, oh, we know they applied ED somewhere else and didn't get in. Like Carter brought up the point that even if that was true, if you're bringing value to them, then they're going to respect the value that they're bringing, right? There's many a school that would be really transparent about ED2. ED2 is the good parallel. Many times I'll say something because it was said on our podcast. Jim Bach at Swarthmore, he has indicated, we know that we get some great kids in ED2 that might not have got into Brown or might not have gotten it. Hey, listen, you can come in here and help us. We're just looking at who can help us. So that's true in and of itself, but it's also true that colleges really do, make a point of not going there. In fact, I was listening to an admission officer who, it's funny, I had talked about having him come on the podcast when he was over Florida's office, and now he's moved on to Rice. And I was listening to him, and he said something which you'll often hear from admission officers, and this is what he said. If we don't know, we don't guess. If we don't know, we don't guess. And that and that tends to be the mindset, right? So there's a couple of things I'm saying. Even if somebody did know that you'd been rejected somewhere else, they're looking at it through the prism of, listen, can you come in here and help us? Can you add? But I'm making the point that they don't go there. They won't work off of the assumption, well, we know this kid applied ED somewhere else and didn't get in. So let's read with skeptical eyes here because there's something wrong with them. They're not even going to go there. They don't know. There are lots of kids that don't apply ED for many, many reasons. And so I don't think it would be fair to assume that colleges would even think that you applied ED somewhere else.
And I also would say there are a lot of particularly private institutions who release early action decisions in January instead of December, partially motivated by the idea that students will be denied from an early decision 1 and potentially convert their EA application at that institution to an early decision 2 application. And so they almost are sort of courting students, in my view, who may have been rejected by somewhere in ED1 that might be sort of further up the food chain so to speak, but that these schools are still really fantastic, amazing, reputable, prestigious places that recognize that, if a student gets denied at Columbia, say, that then they might be interested in their institution. And I don't think that anyone that I've talked to is going to think any less of a student because of that.
Let's unpack that, Carter. That might be confusing to some people. So,
Okay.
so what Carter's talking about here, when you like, there are about 100 colleges that have ED2, and when they have ED2, that you're typically looking at a deadline that's pretty close to February 1st. And so what he's saying is there's a lot of intentionality that goes into some schools releasing decisions, before that deadline, like knowing that it opens up other opportunities. Like there's conscious awareness and you see the same,
Yeah.
you see this with ED1 and ED2 too, right? Like it's very intentional that you'll hear back from early decision one schools, well before any ED2 deadline.
Right.
So that's intentional, that timing.
Yeah. And so if you have submitted an ED1 application to College A, and then you have an EA application at the same time to College B, you get denied from College A, but College B isn't going to tell you the EA decision until February 1st. That gives you time, if College B has early decision too, to say, actually, can I take my EA application and turn it into an ED2 application because I got denied from my ED1 school? And College B is never going to say, well, wait, did you get denied from ED1, or did you, purely out of the goodness of your heart decide that this was the right place for you on December 28th or January 5th or whatever it is? They're just going to say, sure, let's convert that application to early decision too. And now they have the opportunity to snap you up.
I don't want to overly inflate people's expectations if they were denied a place and then they apply ED and think that, oh, I guess I'm probably getting in, because there's so much more that goes into that. Like it's going to be in the context of, are you competitive in that pool? We're just making the point that it is you're a different student to them as an ED applicant, and you're also a different student with some extra time and a different application. But if you overshot, which so many people do, you shouldn't expect ED's not magic. And sometimes in emphasizing ED and how different the process is, which it is, occasionally a person gets false hope. Like even just using a place like Columbia. Columbia is still a very, very hard admit for an ED student. It just is. And the acceptance rate in ED aren't that great. They're not. They may be around 13%. Don't quote me on that, but pretty close to that. So you're still talking about 1 in 8 chance.
Yeah, which is still, 3 or 4 times better than the regular decision one, but it also still means that 85% of the students are not getting it in early decision one. So yes, I should have been clearer in saying that. Is there a chance for a different outcome? Absolutely, there's a chance, but without knowing the specifics of how competitive the student might have been, as a high school senior, it's hard to say for any given individual student if that student has a strong chance or not.
Yeah. But like Carter said, there's definitely a better chance ED. It's not quite the same as looking at the statistics, because schools will tell you that the recruited athletes go into the ED1 pool. Usually actively engaged alum donors go into that pool. And a lot of schools will tell you that the ED pool is stronger overall than the regular pool. So it's hard to just statistically say it's 4 times. It just I remember when I was interviewing Lee Coffin from Dartmouth, and I kind of challenged him on at the time, they had on paper it looked like 7 times better chance in ED than regular admissions, because like 4% admit rate to 28,
Yeah.
but then he brought up a really good point. it says, first of all, we're the smallest Ivy League school by 24%, and we still have the same number of athletic teams. So just our non-athlete ED rate is 12. So, so you can't quite just look at the statistics and just say, oh, 3 times or 4 times easier, but it's still significantly easier. And Carter and I know it, and we see it all the time. We see kids that get in ED that would not get in regular.
Yeah, when I'm saying that the admit rate is 3 or 4 times higher, that again is the global admit rate. Kind of as you're alluding to, that's not necessarily any individual student's admit rate, and so there are absolutely a lot of factors. But are there students that apply regular decision to these schools that would have likely been admitted in early decision had they applied through early decision? I mean, absolutely. And so whether this kid ends up being one of those or not, I don't know. Maybe he will. And if he wants to maximize his chances, I would, recommend sort of those new essays and new levels of reflection.
Yeah. Let me share something with I said to somebody in the counseling room just 2 days ago, Carter. It's a student who was not admitted to some very, very highly selective schools coming out of high school. And then they were asking me how the schools would feel about them applying as a transfer to those same schools now that they're freshmen in college. And this is a high flyer kid. And I said, well, I'll give you the pros and the cons. Like, I've had colleges tell me that that's going to be pretty tough because you just applied and how much has really changed in a few months. So that's one side of the argument. But on the other side of the argument, I've actually seen it be successful.
Yeah.
I've seen multiple examples of kids that didn't get in, applied as a transfer to that same school as a freshman, and they got in. And so if we've seen that ourselves with a transfer applicant, the college doesn't know they're going to yield the applicant. Even the transfers usually don't apply to as many schools as first-year students do. So percentage-wise, there's a higher chance of yield. With ED, you're going to get the kid. So the college is very much incentivized if they feel the student can come in here and add. And so certainly if it happens for transfers, hopefully people saw the connection I'm making between transfers, and ED, and it didn't feel like, why in the world is he talking about transfers,
I understood it. And yeah. I think the idea is not just the student themselves having changed or how much they've changed over the year, though. I mean, I would argue that a freshman transfer applicant can be a very different applicant than a 12th grade first year applicant. But I think that there's also the pool that they're in. And so in early decision, you're inevitably looking at a smaller pool of applicants, and that a college, if a college has a history of admitting 50% of its class through early decision 1, they're going to try to hit that number. And so kind of a lot that's outside of your control is who else is in that early decision pool. And that's the same with the transfer process. You don't know how many people might have transferred out from the school, how many beds are available. You don't know who else is applying. There's so many different variables, so many different factors that you can't control that could influence what that decision is, that I do feel in many cases it's at least worth a shot to see what happens. So
yeah, and the other thing is, colleges are always looking for great fits, and they're looking for people that are aligned with their mission. They're looking for people who are enthusiastic and excited to be there. And there is a potential for you to kind of weave that. Like, okay, this person's coming back again. They clearly have interest in us. And if through your writing, you're really able to show how that school uniquely meets what you're looking for in a college experience, there's a part of that has appeal.
Yeah.
Colleges love the zealot. They love, schools will tell you one of the reasons why they like ED, it's not just the lock-in factor. and how that helps with, the enrollment management and getting the right number of heads and beds and decreasing the work in admission and helping ensure that they meet a lot of their enrollment goals and individual institutional priorities. Like, there's all of those components, but they'll tell you, we want the enthusiastic kid who's fired up to be here. That adds value to our campus.
Yep.
And like, there's potential for you to really come across that way. Okay, you didn't get in the first time. Clearly, you've got some attraction here. Now, you can blow it all by saying you're highly ranked. You're higher ranked than, than other schools I'm looking at. Nobody wants to hear that. But if you're able to thread the needle and show you offer some very unique things that has me so excited about your school that I'm ready to commit. There's a part of that could really land in a way that could elevate your value. Would you agree with that, Carter?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's not necessarily going to elevate a student who is extremely outside of the academic range.
I'll go further and say it won't do that.
Yeah,
it won't do that.
That's a conversation that we sometimes have to have with students and families in what we do. But if you're in that range and you're academically competitive for an institution, and you're able to make a case for the fit and for why that's the one of all of the great institutions that works the best for you, that absolutely is a factor.
Yeah, and you're going to have to do that by getting very specific without getting into this. It can't be great academics, like your school size, like your location. You're going to have to get way beyond that. It can't. I always say to people, is your message something that could be applied to any other school? And if the answer is yes, then you haven't gone custom enough. So you're going to have to really get custom in doing the research to pull out what it is about that school that is appealing to you. And if what you're saying feels like, let's say it was Carter, and let's say the student feels, and the admission office feels like, Carter just gets us. He just gets us. That's who we are. What he's saying and what he's looking for is who we are. And he's coming in with some enthusiasm. That's a pretty appealing combination, as long as, once again, like Carter said, you're in profile and you're meeting the needs of the institution.
Yeah, and so to tie it back to the caller's question, that idea, I guess, is I would really try to make sure that I don't have the same application, the next time around, to maybe go back and reflect on the ways that you answered the supplemental essays, the questions, assuming that there were questions about why you're applying to that school or that program, to reflect on that and see if there's any deeper you can dig into that, and to make that case even more strongly the next time around.
Carter, this has been great. I know last time you were here, we were talking about an early decision article that ran in the New York Times, and nice to team up with you the last few weeks and do some questions from listeners. Excited to...
This is a great one.
Yeah, great one. Thank you. Thanks for sending in all these great questions you guys are sending in, listeners. Take care. Thanks, Carter.
Thanks.
Friends, this completes the question from a listener. Let's hear the final part of my interview with Barbara Kalmus.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, we've reached the final part of my interview with Barbara Kalmus. And in part 2, Barbara talks about how things have changed since the 1990s. Barbara talks about institutional priorities. And we close where we started, talking about how students have to protect their mental health in this college process. Listen and enjoy. And let me say this, because I don't want us to sound like we're high on our hobby horse or we're self-righteous. So a lot of times it's understandable. Like, students will use the term safety school, and what they will mean is, I don't want to get shut out everywhere, so I want a school that has a higher probability of me getting in. And that's perfectly fine. Like, any one of us who builds lists, we would be completely irresponsible if we didn't build lists in a way that people do have some schools on the list that have higher probability of getting in. So I get that's what they mean. They really do mean that. It's completely innocuous. They're being innocent, right? There's nothing malevolent, but it's just that they don't realize that by saying that language over and over and over again, they're setting themselves up so that if they end up going there, I've never seen anybody be happy with something they called a safety school.
Right.
You
Exactly.
know,
Exactly.
and then also it can lead you to judging others that way too. Well, if somebody else goes to a school that you think is a safety school for them, then you run the risk of thinking, oh, that's not very good. And I know that because kids will tell you this. They'll tell you, I mentioned such and such to my peer group, and they said, you can do better than that.
Oh my God.
Right. So this is the kind of stuff that's out there. And
Yeah.
I know we're not going to completely change the world. I mean, prestige makes a lot of the world go around, and a lot of decisions are made based on that. I've come to accept that, that's the reality for a lot of people. I don't like it when it's the only thing. I've accepted for a lot of people it will be an important thing, but I don't like it when it's the only thing. But I'm concerned about the impact on kids' mental health. I'm concerned about how kids feeling good about themselves, and just with some little repositioning, you can do wonders for helping a kid to feel great about themselves. Now
Absolutely.
it's not always that easy because depending on the peer group you're in or family pressures, and family pressures can come from grandparents. I've seen so many times over the years, grandma's not happy, grandpa. So it's hard. There are a lot of voices. And one of the challenges with the parent and the grandparent community is admissions was so completely different
Oh my
when
God.
they went to school that they just don't have their frame of reference unless they're really educating themselves, listening to podcasts like this and immersing themselves in other sources. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, and with parents and with grandparents, when you look at parents, grandparents who are pre-90s going to college, and you look at the admit statistics back then, and you have Penn with at one point a 50% admit rate, and Northeastern with a 98% admit rate. And uh and so it's our job to help try to educate them. Yes, when you went, it was a 50% admit rate. I remember, Mark, when Perry was applying, 1400 was like phew,
Oh
fantastic
yeah.
in
Oh
SAT.
yeah.
You
Oh
can
yeah.
apply to any Ivy you want with a 1400.
Yeah.
And, look where we are today, right?
It's funny you say that. I was just talking with one of my clients on the West Coast, and the subject of test scores came up. This is somebody who went to Harvard. And he says to me, my 1440 is not getting my kid into Harvard like it got me into Harvard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But some parents just think, they don't realize the differences today, the sheer numbers of applicants. And, when you break it down, I mean, out here at UCLA, what did we have last year? 165,000
Yeah.
applicants
That's insane.
for taking 10,000 to yield 6,500. Like, it no longer has anything to do with a lot of what we think it has to do with. And I think the whole concept of institutional priorities, I think, is so important. And I'm so happy you guys deal with that on a regular basis, because that really helps parents begin to understand there's nothing wrong with my kid. It's like college admissions. I always look at like a bicycle wheel, and that has a million spokes, right? And that keeps the wheel steady and turning. And if you start removing spokes, it gets wobbly. And if you remove all of them, the bike crashes. And I look at college admissions in that way, that we have to fill all the spokes around the wheel. And there are not a whole lot of places available, right? Other than Princeton, can you think of any school that there are a few now? I think
Mm-hmm.
TCU, thank you,
Mm-hmm.
is now increasing in size. But like, can you think of any other schools that have done a dramatic increase in class size?
Yeah, there's some. I mean, yeah, Yale added 200 kids a year for 4 straight years, which when you
Yeah,
look at the size of their undergrad, that's a pretty significant increase.
yeah.
Right now, UNC Chapel Hill's on a 10-year
Very.
plan to add 500 kids per year for 10 years,
Which is
adding 5,000. And I noticed a difference even last year. I saw a couple of kids get in that I felt probably wouldn't, and I had a chance to talk to their director of admission about it. And yeah, they noticed it there. So, there are schools, I mean, Alabama, I mean, they really used their football success to add more than 5,000. Like, they chose not to go to the super more selective route, but just to expand the size of their school. There are quite a few. High Point went from 1,600 to 6,500, since 2005 to 2024. But most schools don't take that path, you
Yeah.
know? Hmm.
And I think once parents also realize that the sizes of the classes aren't changing,
Hmm.
and yet we have to keep this bicycle wheel steady. We have to fill all the spokes. And so it becomes, it's not there's anything wrong with your kid. It's
Hmm.
great and amazing. There just aren't enough spaces at these schools. And, that's why when you fill that list up with 10 dreams, not one dream, just is stress free, and kids are happy and they're excited and they can't wait to put on the sweatshirt. But, we've just got to begin to think about how we're phrasing things and how does the teenager hear it? That's the key. We may not mean it the way, in a negative way, but what does the teenager hear? And the psychology behind that, I think, is just crucial. Yeah.
And one thing I want to encourage parents to do, people, particularly if you're buying into what Barbara and I are saying, and by mean buying into, I mean being careful to protect the mental health of your student by setting them up in a way so they're not feeling less than. That's basically the message. Like we're talking about vocab, that's one component of it. But one thing I really encourage you to do is be very careful about who you expose your student to. Like, let's say somebody professionally is very successful, and let's say they did not go to designer school. Have them over for dinner. Have them meet that to combat all the different voices in their ear. One thing that I have always respected, and Barbara, you know this better than I do, but the Palo Alto area is really tough. It is a pressure area on students. Well, I can think of 3 or 4 students that I've worked with over the years, in the last 4 or 5 years from that area, that the parents did such a good job of pushing back against that culture. Part of it was the parents' own belief system. Part of it was who the parents introduced the student to, that the students literally bought into this. Like you
Mhm.
can have success with your student partly through your own belief system because they're going to know what you think and they're not going to know what you think. You can't just say the right words, right? If you're going to be really disappointed if they don't go to an Ivy or Ivy peer or super selective school, Berkeley, UCLA, whatever it is, they're going to know it. You can't just say it doesn't really matter where you go. We're going to love you the same. They'll know if they're disappointing you.
Oh,
So you
yeah.
have to first start with getting into that mental space yourself if you're not there. And a good way to do that is just educate yourself on all the people that have done incredibly well that didn't go designer schools.
I love
But
that
then
idea.
yeah, but then you can control this to some extent. Not completely because we're fighting a culture, but I've seen it. I can think of it's actually 4. I said 3 or 4. I can think of 4 specific people from the Palo Alto area, and they would say, "Listen, it is hard. We're fighting it every single day, but these are the things that we're doing." And they had students that really believed that they didn't have to go to Berkeley or UCLA or Stanford, or name your other school to feel good about themselves.
Yeah. I love the idea of introducing them to successful people. Or you know what? I always say to kids, when you go if into the doctor's office or you go into your parents' lawyer or accountant or your teachers, do you know where they went to school? Have you ever
Such a
asked
good
them?
point. It's
Who
such a good point. I
asked? Do you
know.
know where I went to school? No,
Yeah.
you have no
No.
idea where I went to school,
No.
right? And
Yeah.
yet, and that's another thing. And maybe, yeah, start asking, where did you go to school? You know, like
Another thing I like to have people do, Barbara, like you're watching television and somebody's kind of impressive to you. Google them.
Google them.
Google them. And you know what you're going to find? You're going to find a wide range. Some of the people went to brand names and most of them didn't because most of the schools are not brand name. And
Yeah.
you're going to start to see, wow, look at all these people that didn't necessarily go to the designer label.
Yeah.
Now, that does not mean it's wrong for someone to have aspirations to go to a very competitive school. Some kids are ambitious and I don't want to go so far as to make it sound like every highly competitive school isn't good because a lot of them are very good and a lot of them have tremendous resources.
Right.
But I don't want you to erect this worldview, which to me is a false worldview that says if I don't go to designer label, then I kind of go on the B trajectory for success, or maybe the C trajectory. I'll never ever really be on that A or A plus trajectory because, I mean, how could I? I'm only going to my safety school or my probable or my likely or whatever foundational, whatever term you use. Yeah. Yeah.
My final story, Mark,
Mhm.
we use this in all of our presentations and our webinars. I always throw it out. If you're interested in gaming and animation and you got into Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Stanford, and Full Sail University, where would you go? And everybody laughs, because obviously they know where I'm going with this. And that's the other thing. Know what it is you want to study and then find the perfect place that can give you that thing. So if you're into gaming, and I don't work for Full Sail University, you're into gaming and you're into animation, you'd be crazy not to go there. Because take a look at who gets hired in all the animation studios in California and where did they go to school. So I just think we have to keep reminding kids, let's define what you want. Let's find your lane. The lane can change 100 times at least. Okay, but let's see where your lane is right now. And where are you comfortably fitting in so you will succeed? That's all that matters. And then we'll go to it's not where you go. It's not Mark. It's just so you don't say it every time. I wish you would say it every single time, 5 times a podcast.
Well, it's funny. It's funny because I have thought maybe I need to say it more, because people really do learn by repetition.
Yeah, right.
I can't tell you how many times people have said that to me, or we have said we've adopted that as our family philosophy, or what I also say, which I now have on every single intro: college is a match to be made, not a prize to be won. That's now permanently on the intro. So that's a similar way of saying that, the similar way of saying that message. But it's just important guarding your kids' mental health. For people that play sports, one of the common things that happens in sports is trash talk. And people trash talk. They trash talk on the playground. They trash talk in the NBA. People like Larry Bird, Kevin Garnett, a lot of famous trash talkers. And why do they trash talk? Because if I can mentally defeat you,
Exactly,
then I can defeat your body if I can defeat your mind. Because I can psych you out of allowing you to accomplish or believing you're capable of accomplishing what you are because you're defeated mentally. And think of this as an antidote. Think of this as an antidote to all the trash talk that's out there. And we're trying to, help keep that trash talk from seething into your student's brain. Because we see it. Barbara's been doing this stuff since the 70s. We see what happens to kids. This process, it can be grueling if you have the wrong voices in your head. And I'm talking about for the highest achievers, because I mean, when you're talking about places like the Harvards and the Stanfords and the Princetons and the Yales and the Dukes and the Browns, these Columbias, Caltechs, MITs, these schools deny more valedictorians than they accept. Their acceptance rate for valedictorians is usually about 1 in 3 to 1 in 5. So, you're thinking you're super hotshot, and you are impressive in your echo chamber, but in the big scheme of things, they're still that's why they're reach for alls. And so you have to have a mentality that says, well, what else could I be very, very excited about if it's not the place that I've set my heart on? And try not to set your heart on one school.
Set your heart. That's another term. My heart is set on it. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, set your heart on 10 places, 15 places.
Yeah.
We only have 3,000 to choose from, right? I think you can find 10. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, you're preaching at the choir, as they say, Barbara. Well, I think that we've covered this topic. I appreciate you coming on. Keep doing what you're doing. And I know to some of you, this probably sounds like we're kind of on our soapbox, but honestly, we really just want kids to reach their full potential.
Absolutely.
And if you're not feeling good about yourself, you're not going to reach your full potential.
Absolutely.
And it starts here, and it's hard. Those voices from kids and peers and relatives and everybody saying those little comments, think of it as taking your your shot. You go get your shot, your COVID shot, your flu shot, whatever, to protect yourself from diseases coming at you. This is our way of trying to protect your kid from some of the diseases that are going to be coming out there by all the messages in society. So thanks, Barbara. Keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. Love the podcast. Love everybody on your podcast. It has been for me a godsend. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. It's a joy. All right, friends, let's transition to part 2 of 3 of the College Spotlight with Grace Robertson-Lloyd of Grinnell College in Grinnell, Iowa.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Friends, we've reached part 2 of 3, and in part 2, Grace talks about some distinctive programs that Grinnell offers. Grace talks about the Grinnell Endowment and how it enhances the student experience. And then I share approximately 10 to 12 perceptions that I have of Grinnell College that I've just formulated in my 26 years of doing this work. And Grace comments on each of my perceptions. Now, this is going to cover the rest of part 2, and it also forms the lion's share of what we cover in the final part next Thursday. Listen and enjoy. Now, let's talk about distinctive programs Grinnell has. Talk to our listeners a little bit about your Washington, D.C. program and any other program that you want to, kind of champion or herald.
Yeah. So we, great research. So we have a program in Washington, D.C. where students can do that in lieu of a study abroad program. So we call that off-campus study. And that program typically involves either taking classes at an institution based in DC or doing an internship, and often that's political related. We have a similar program in London, and that's the program that I did, where you can either have an internship or, again, take classes at a local university in London. And that was an amazing experience. I loved it. Totally just, I would recommend it for anybody who ends up at Grinnell. Other distinctive programs, I mean, we have this amazing, it's basically a plot of preserved land, 360-ish acres of preserved prairie land. And if you aren't familiar, listeners, etc., the prairie is something that has virtually been destroyed. It's like a decimated ecosystem at this point just because of agriculture. And there's nothing we can do about that, but we have preserved this plot just for research and for our students to better understand this ecosystem and try to just know more about it from the flora and the fauna, et cetera, that exists there. So that's, I think, something really special, and it's called CERA, Conard Environmental Research Area. And then I have to shout out computer science because we're a very different university in that we're a liberal arts and sciences college known for computer science. It is our most popular major every single year. The co-founder of Intel and the co-inventor of the microchip went to Grinnell College, so that certainly helps, and has made that program just such a popular one for students. It's also not a program, but something to know about Grinnell is we're really lucky to have the endowment that we do and to be able to put so much towards the financial aid for students. So we have a $2.5 billion endowment, which is wild amid all of these different institutions to have such a large endowment and to be able to use that to have what we call the gold standard of financial aid, where we meet the full demonstrated financial need of every admitted student, regardless of their citizenship. We don't package loans in original packages. So the idea is no loan initiative. And then we also, for any U.S. citizen or permanent resident, we don't even consider finances when reviewing an application. So it's allowed us to give over $83 million per year in financial aid. And again, that's a wild number for a tiny, tiny school of just 1,800 students. But we definitely highlight that financial aid program and the endowment that makes that possible as something very distinctive about Grinnell, and especially to be a small school in rural Iowa that can do that is something we're really proud of.
No, that's great. So I'm going to, for the rest of our time, I'm going to share with you perceptions I have of Grinnell, either from my time there or from students. I have some students at Grinnell right now, 3 students at Grinnell, and many students over the past. So, talk to them and you get an impression. So these are perceptions I have, and I want you to tell me if you feel they're accurate or inaccurate or expand on them. So the first is academically rigorous and a pretty serious, intense workload.
I definitely agree with that. It's not at the expense of fun, but it is definitely a rigorous environment. This is not a place that you can just slide through academically.
I had quirky down here already, but you've kind of already said that. You even used that exact word. So when you say quirky, why don't you talk about how you define that and what that means in Grinnell, from a Grinnell perspective?
So to me, quirky, I think sometimes has negative connotations, but in my mind and how I envision it for Grinnell students, it's being unapologetically yourself. I think that's really what it is. These are students that are creative, thoughtful. Again, they put like so much passion into everything. And, whether that's just being themselves on a daily basis or finding out that, wow, this person in my bio class is actually a circus performer back home, right? Like that's the kind of student you'll run into at Grinnell College. And so to me, quirky is more like being yourself, absolutely, not trying to fit in with the status quo, not being cliquey. It's really just people being who they are.
So here's one for you, writing heavy curriculum.
That is for sure. Regardless of what you major in, you are going to have to write. That's why we take in the application process the essay seriously. We want to know that you're ready for this curriculum. So you could be computer science or physics, or you could, of course, be English. You could be studio art. You could be philosophy. All of those are going to have an intensive writing portion of the experience within the major department. And you're going to have to write and, submit papers. If you want to go into be published, whether you're in STEM or in the humanities, it's going to really require excellent writing skills. And so that's why we emphasize that so much.
So here's one, not as status conscious students as many other students who are very academically successful in high school. And that could be partly, all the trappings of the cars you drive, the clothes you wear and all that, or even picking schools just off of prestige more so than thinking through like fit and match. It's kind of a lot of things, but status conscious encompasses a lot. But is that something you would agree with?
I love that. Yes, our students are not as status conscious. Part of that, I think, is because Grinnell does this thing where any of our on-campus events, all of them, 500 per school year, they are all free. They are all walking distance. So you walk maybe 15 minutes. And so it means that you're not exposing your financial status in the same way. And I think that's a big part of why it helps students just, again, feel able to be themselves and not feel like, oh, I can't afford to go to that concert, so I'm not. And so everybody at the concert is from a certain status. I think the just openness and the accessibility, both financial and physical, of the different things that happen on campus make it a less status conscious institution. So
this next one we've already discussed thoroughly. The open curriculum makes the classroom experience enriching. So I'm going to give you another one that I think of. I know Grinnell's really strong in like English and political science and theater and foreign languages, but I really think of Grinnell's being very strong in natural sciences. And over the years, I've worked with quite a few students that have picked Grinnell partly because of that and have kind of been on a pre-med track. Do you think of that as a strength of Grinnell, like academically in the that sort of pre-med track? Because in my mind, it's one of the things that stands out. But tell me, you're a student there and you work there. You know more than me.
No, absolutely. So bio and biochemistry are consistently in our top 5 most popular majors. Chemistry also often bumps up into that top 5. And so, yes, pre-med students, students that are especially interested in going into either medicine or they want to do science research. That's also something we find is really popular. We're consistently in the top 10 per capita for PhD production in STEM PhDs. So we see a lot of our students they want to pursue the natural sciences. They often are double majoring in something else like a humanities, but they're pursuing that as their career. And they're finding at Grinnell, they get the wonderful expertise of like great professors, research, funding, et cetera, that they can utilize to make that career possible. But they also can still take studio art and music and a foreign language and study abroad and whatever else it might be. And so I think that's part of why the natural sciences have become so popular, is because you can do a little bit of everything that you want to. I always like to say, you don't want a doctor that all they know is biology, right? Like you want a doctor that you can have a conversation with and has a hobby, like they read a book, whatever it is. Or like you want someone that's a human being. And I think our students are human beings who want to be a part of the medical field in some different way when it comes to specifically those natural science students.
So here's one full of students who want to change the world. Like I know you have plenty of people, that go econ and go to Wall Street, but I don't think of Grinnell as sending as many kids to Wall Street as a place like Williams College. I think of you a lot more like Oberlin, or maybe Carleton, and places that, sure, you have all kinds of different majors, but just a lot of students that are really thinking of service professions and changing the world. Do you think that's fair?
I think that's fair. I think even for the students, because we do have a good number that go to Wall Street, that go into, those investment positions or those, lawyer positions, et cetera. And they have, the great paycheck and things like that, but they're not looking just to do that. They are on the side doing something else if that's like what their career is. I feel like this is a school that really trains students to think, if this isn't your career, can you make it your side thing? Can you make this something that you do because we want you to make the world a better place, and our students want to make the world a better place. And so whether that's through their professions as, maybe nonprofit workers or whatever it might be, or if it's on the side, speaking from my husband's experience, he's a lawyer, but a big part of his life is being able to help other people. When he was in law school, he worked for an immigration clinic, a law clinic, and now he coaches a wonderful youth basketball team, and just like things like that just can help. And so whether it's small or big, I think a lot of our students, when they're looking at post-grad, they're trying to think about not just what will make them do well, but also what can they do that makes them do well and helps other people too. And that's a really inspiring thing.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because to me, it's more of a mindset, right? So yeah, certainly I know plenty of lawyers that are very generous and very committed to being difference makers. And the same applies to business people, whether it's Wall Street or business owners. So it's not so much the profession as it is the mindset. I think so. I'm really glad you called attention to that. So we've already talked about the large endowment. Of course, you mentioned, having a co-founder of Intel. I'm sure there's a generous contributor there. Warren Buffett oftentimes gets a lot of credit. You can probably share what Warren Buffett, the role he's played in Geico with the endowment at Grinnell, but then also talk a little bit about how the endowment actually enhances the student experience.
Yes. So Warren Buffett did not go to Grinnell, just, full disclosure, but the person who served as his mentor, and you can read about it in I believe his latest book, which talks about how his mentor, Joe Rosenfield, who went to Grinnell College and was a major philanthropist and investor, taught him what he knows and was an inspiration and told him, hey, please make sure my college does not fail. I love Grinnell College. And so Warren Buffett made sure that we succeeded, managed our investments. I believe he served on our board of trustees for, I'm not sure exactly how many years, but a good chunk of years. Yeah. With the full purpose of supporting Grinnell. and did some kind of wild business decisions, which you can also read about in the book, such as like funding a radio station. And anyway, it's a fascinating read, and I highly recommend it. There's also an article that you can read. I forget who published it, but it was like a synopsis if you want that instead of the full book. But thank you, Warren Buffett. We really appreciate it. And then I would say in how it enhances the student learning experience. I mean, we fund internships. We fund research for students. We fund study abroad. So if a student, for example, gets any study abroad program approved, the financial aid that they receive from the college goes with them. So instead of paying full freight for, that program at the London School of Economics, you're paying the Grinnell price for that instead. And so your financial situation carries over and we cover the difference. That's something really special and makes it more accessible to take advantage of a lot of these great opportunities. It also plays into just how, again, all these different events are free. All the speakers who come to campus are free. These wonderful authors who visit through the Writers at Grinnell program, which I am biased towards and absolutely love. Like, that is all free for students. And so that endowment from financial aid to more of these like preparation, internship, career focused things, all the way to just going to a concert, going to someone who's visiting campus, it's covered through the endowment and through the funding that they strategically put towards and thoughtfully put towards to make everything accessible for students. And it does truly enhance the student learning experience. There's no doubt. So.
And I would also add that you're one of the schools that has both generous need-based and generous merit-based. And a lot of times you'll find schools have one or the other, but not necessarily both. Trinity and San Antonio is a lot like that, but when you see schools like that, you will see a large endowment because lots of people would want to do that. But if you don't have it, you don't have it.
That's true.
So what about this? Ambitious, driven, independent students.
Yeah, I love this one. So our students are definitely ambitious, and that comes in a lot of different forms. But the one kind of like caveat to this sort of, I guess, perception that people might have of ambitious, driven, independent sometimes sounds like you're going to put people down. And again, that is not the experience at Grinnell. This is a place where you don't have to put anybody down to build yourself up. In fact, it's better to all rise together, right? And so with that ambition, I think comes an understanding of, okay, I want to be a doctor. I want to be an amazing doctor, and my MCAT score and my success in that is not going to be affected by someone else's. And that's just truth, right? And so students study together for the MCAT, for the LSAT, for the GRE, for all these different major exams. Students share notes. They do study groups. They support each other. People also don't do GPA comparisons that you find a lot of times. So I didn't know my GPA until pretty much I started applying to jobs, and I was like, oh, that was my GPA. Cool. That's not the driving force of the experience. It's much more about like, you have your personal ambition and you should fight for it and go forward with it, but not at the expense of anyone else. So I would say, yes, ambitious, driven, and independent is definitely true of our students, but in a positive way, in a healthy way, that I think in large part just comes from the fact that that's the kind of school and the students that we're looking for are students that have a drive, but also want to be a part of a community that will help build them up. And to do that, you need to help build other people up too, right? That's what being part of a community is all about. So
here's one for you, LGBTQ friendly.
Yes, Grinnell is consistently rated highly on the Pride Index and things like that. LGBTQIA plus friendly is definitely a term that I often use. When it comes to Grinnell, we have the Stonewall Resource Center for LGBTQI plus students, and that provides all different sorts of activities and support systems. It organizes different clubs and hosts different meetings, whether it's, the Queer People of Color, which hosts the biannual now, drag show, or offers, things like there's a closet, right? A drag closet for students, so that they can have clothing and feel comfortable trying on clothing that might be from a different gender than they have traditionally identified with. And so they do so much wonderful programming to make sure that students feel welcome. And being in a small town in Iowa, again, that's something that I think often surprises students, is that we are such an LGBTQI plus friendly institution with so many different events and so many ways to celebrate your identity on our campus. So Stonewall Resource Center, definitely want to highlight, but there are all of these different student-run organizations and clubs as well that do the same thing. So, yeah.
So here's one, remote and rural. Like, you're surrounded by cornfields, remote and rural. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm not going to pretend that we're not rural or remote. We are an hour from Des Moines, an hour from Iowa City, 4.5 hours from Chicago, 5 hours from Minneapolis, right? Only 3 hours from Omaha. If you're an Omaha, Nebraska fan, it's great. The zoo is awesome. Great steak also if you eat meat. So you have these wonderful cities that are driving distance, but they're not going to be like right in your backyard. But the benefit of that, I think, is, again, just that sense of community that you get by being in a smaller place that's very close-knit, where everybody has the shared experience of being in this space for 4 years. And so I think, yes, it is remote, it is rural, but not so remote that you feel claustrophobic or stuck in a bubble, not so rural that you feel like you can't get the experience of a city. We offer shuttles that take you to Des Moines, which is awesome. I love Des Moines. We have shuttles to Iowa City. We have shuttles to downtown. You can also walk to downtown. It's only 2 blocks. In the winter, you might want to take the shuttle, but yes, it's very accessible. And the downtown is adorable. It has restaurants, a movie theater. It has great shopping, awesome thrift shops. There's a lot going on in the town because it is its own separate community too. Very friendly towards the college, but it is its own space as well that students enter in and out of. And so, yes, definitely remote, definitely rural, but with the caveat of you have something very close by and you have access to the cities if you need that access.
All right. So I have probably a hard follow-up on this one. So the company that I founded, we have a questionnaire, and we ask all of our students to rate 5 different campus settings and describe their interest in them. So they have to pick large, let us know what their thoughts are: large city, small city, college town, suburbs. And then we had rural, and it was just absolutely getting obliterated. It was so bad. I said, okay, let's change the language. Let's put remote. Same thing. So how hard does that make it for you as a recruiter? Because when I look at the responses that I see to remote and rural, it's rough. And so much so that 7 years ago, I had Sam Prouty, who's over the admission office at Middlebury, come on the podcast to make a case for the remote rural school, which I thought he did very persuasively. But the question is, how hard does that make it for you recruiting students to Grinnell? Like, you're in Denver. People are used to, the advantages. They have a zillion choices of Thai food or whatever.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Also, Sam, love you. That's awesome that you had him on your show as well. So the big thing that I always counter with, because you're right, it is a challenge in the recruitment process, especially as someone living in Denver, which is a wonderful, major, very diverse city. And then you're thinking about a remote and more rural institution, right? But the community that you build is absolutely unique. It is something that you will live with for the rest of your life in the most positive ways. And I think for the right students, it's a perfect fit for them. The other piece I always want to mention, and I think especially is forgotten because we are so small and we are in Iowa, but Grinnell is incredibly diverse in so many different ways. I mean, we are 20% non-US citizens. So my work in international mission is recruiting international students to come here. So these are non-US citizens. I'm not even counting the dual and triple citizens, which would bring us over 25% of our student body, right? So you have students coming from over 65 different citizenships and countries, speaking over 70 languages, all living on the same campus. Students from 47 different states, all on the same campus, and it's a small campus. So it's not a place where you're going to feel like, oh, I'm in the middle of nowhere surrounded by people who all grew up here. You know, we love our Iowans. We love Grinnell, Iowa. But this is a school that brings people from everywhere to be here for their 4 years. And that is a really important distinction. That was a huge selling point for me because I was scared I would be the only person from New Jersey going to this tiny school in Iowa. And when I got there, and immediately my roommate was from DC, my best friend is from Hawaii, my husband is from Colorado. I met people from so many different places. I studied abroad with students who were from Korea and Vietnam. And I felt like I would never have met any of these students otherwise. And so to be in a remote rural place that is also very exceptionally, and especially geographically diverse, makes it feel less small. It feels like you have the cosmopolitan energy in a small campus setting. And that was exactly what I wanted, because I wanted the feel and the vibrancy and the energy of being in a place where people have all different backgrounds and, cultural, experiences that they're bringing to everything that they do, while in a place that is intentionally very small and focused. I didn't want to get lost in a city. I wanted to spend my weekends with these same people, but I also wanted to learn from these people that I went to school with. And I think for a lot of our students, that's what they are looking for. And it really doesn't feel small when you're in that kind of space with people from everywhere, speaking all different languages, who are living, across the hall from you, and you are taking classes with students from all different backgrounds. And it makes such a difference in that small versus large, because you could go to a large school, but you might feel siloed and not actually interact with the wonderful, people from all different backgrounds and cultures, because it's so big that you don't even know how to find people. At a small school, it's easy to find people. And because you can't just hang out with the 10 students from New Jersey, you're going to have to hang out with people outside of your state, your country, your language, whatever it might be. And I think that alone really makes it feel much less rural, remote than you might expect.
Friends, this concludes this part of my interview with Grace Robertson-Lloyd of Grinnell College. Hope you join us next week for the next part. Friends, on Monday's episode, I think you're going to really like this new segment that I recorded with Carter, who you just heard, and Susan, the three of us. It was a lengthy recording. It was an hour and 40 minutes. And so what we typically do is we like to chunk them out in 20-minute segments so it'll run over the next 5 weeks, 5 Mondays. So really, the last Monday in March and the entire month of April it'll run. And what we attempted to do was answer the question, what are some things students who are standard strong can do to increase their chances of admission? And if you don't know what standard strong is, little tease, you got to come back and listen to Monday's episode, 626, where we break it down. And next, we have a brand new interview for you. It's a two-parter that Lisa did with Jennifer Gershberg, who's an expert on how students can have effective study skills so they can excel in college to set themselves up for success. So we're trying to give you some good content, not only on getting in college, but excelling while you're in college. And friends, pretty much every decision is out now. Everybody should have heard. Of course, some students are waitlisted, and they'll have to find out, work the wait list, and see what happens there. but all the decisions are really out. And this is the time of the year where it's very easy to fall into judgmental thinking. So it's very easy for a student to say, why did Kathy get in over me? Or let me put it in the context of parents. It's not fair. My kid is better than Robert. Why did XYZ school accept Robert over my kid? It just shows how unfair the system is. Well, earlier in my conversation with Carter, about gap years, I referenced something that Charles Murphy said. Now, Charles was the director of admission at the University of Florida, and I know that because I met him in Raleigh, and we talked about him coming on the podcast, and then bang, next thing I know, he pops up at Rice. So now he's the executive director of admission at Rice. And I was listening to him. This is actually when he was at Rice. And I quoted Charles. And what did I say when I quoted Charles? If we don't know, we don't guess. If we don't know, we don't guess. Friends, no one knows why a school admits a student unless you were in the room when the decision was made. So my advice to everyone who is curious as to why Kathy or Robert got admitted over themselves or over their student, listen to Charles Murphy of Rice. If we don't know, we don't guess. If we don't know, we don't guess. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Escobar in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our International Admissions Expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stalionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.